Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Today we are going to be working on our beginning quilting class number 5. If this is the first time that you've seen my channel, you'll want to make sure that to check out the playlist below to my beginning quilting class series. And you'll want to go back to the introduction, watch that first. It gives you the supply list, everything you need to know, and all the PDFs that are required. And then you'll want to watch everything in order. Part 1, 2, 3, 4, and then today is part 5, where I'm going to be teaching you the log cabin quilt. Here you'll see a PDF, and I do have PDFs linked in the description box to each of the series, so make sure that you pull down and print or save the PDF so that you'll have that to work with. We're going to be working on the log cabin block today. This is the sampler quilt that we'll be making. I do recommend putting your PDFs in a notebook and put them in plastic sleeves. That way you'll have it for future, and you can make quilts from each and every one of these blocks. You can make entire quilts, or maybe grab a couple of them and make an entire quilt. In fact, you could make an entire quilt from this log cabin block. They're really fun and fast quilts to make using this wonderful block. Here are some of the blocks that we have done so far. The flying geese, the churn dash, the square in a square, and the rail fence. So we have had fun creating these, and I've simply pulled scraps from my stash. I had pulled some fabrics that I wanted to use up. It started with this focus fabric right here. This is the fabric that I chose to use for this pattern. And then I went into I think I taught you this in the introduction, I went into the selvage and found all of the different colors that are made, that were used to make this particular print. And I just went to my stash and I grabbed fabrics that I had that corresponded to that. And that's what I am using for these parts and pieces for this particular quilt. So today what I'm going to be using are remnants of what I have cut from the previous block. So as we stripped up our stash to cut up the pieces that we needed for these, I have leftover pieces, and I'm saving all those. I've been mentioning to each of you to make sure you put this all together in a basket or something, so that every week that we're working on a new block, all you have to do is kind of search around in there and see what you can use that's already cut for you. So what I'll be doing is cutting a 3.5-inch square. This is going to be my center square for the log cabin. I'm going to cut a 3.5-inch square from that. And then from the dark, medium, and light pink, I'm going to cut 1.5-inch strips. And then I'm going to be using neutrals here instead of blues. So I'll be using a 1.5-inch strips from this dark, this medium, and this light, and that will be what I'm going to be using for the blue side of this log cabin. And then I am using pinks for the pink side of the log cabin. So let's get started on cutting up these strips. The first thing we need is that center square, and that is a 3.5-inch square. So I have my focus fabric here, which is what I'm going to use for that center square. And this has already had the selvage removed, so I don't have to worry about removing that. It's already been removed. I do have it on the straight of grain from a previous cut. So I'm simply going to, first of all, cut off a 3.5-inch strip. Let me turn this over so you can see it a little bit. It's brighter this way here. I'm going to cut a 3.5-inch strip from this. And then I'm going to cut a 3.5-inch square. So I basically have a 1/2 inch of fabric that I'm removing. So there is my center square for my log cabin. So I'm going to set this aside. Now for each one of these, I need a 1.5-inch strip of fabric. For my light, I already have a 1.5-inch strip. That's from the previous cuts from previous blocks, so that one's ready to go. Here is my pink, and this is the medium here. So what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to fold that. Now this was the straight of grain because I had used it before, and I have everything on the straight of grain. Now I'm going to cut this strip so that it is a 1.5-inch wide strip. So I'm lining everything up here, down here, and there it is on the 1.5-inch line. putting this away. All right, so I have some mediums here. So there's my light, there's my medium. I'm going to do the same with this dark pink. So I have a light pink, a medium pink. This will be my dark pink. This one is a little fuzzy on this side. I'm just going to get rid of that fuzz. It is on the straight of grain. It just got a little fuzzy. We'll get rid of some of that. Now I'm going to cut this at 1.5. So I have my light pink, medium pink, and dark pink. They're ready to go. The next thing I need to do is get some neutrals, and I need 1.5 inch neutrals. I think I might have what I need from these pieces. These were leftover remnants. So I'm going to see if I can actually use those when I'm putting this log cabin together. If not, I will cut a 1.5 inch strip from this, but I'm going to wait and see before I make that cut. And here is going to be my medium, and these are, I'm now working on what would be considered the blue side of the log cabin. So this is the lightest blue. This is would be what would be considered the medium blue, and this is going to be considered the dark blue in my case. Just always substitute the colors of fabrics that you happen to be using based upon the pattern itself there. So I'm going to cut another 1.5 inch strip from the medium neutral, so I've got that. And I'm going to need more dark. In fact, this one is not, I don't think it's going to be long enough for me at all. So I am going to take this dark fabric, which would be the darkest blue in the pattern, and I'm going to cut a 1.5 inch strip. And this is my straight edge. I have had already cut from there and got my straight of grain, so that's all on the straight of grain. So I'm simply going to cut a 1.5 inch strip. Okay, so now I have my light, medium, and dark pink, my light, medium, and dark blue, if you will, and then I have my square. Now we're going to put the log cabin together. To get started, we're going to be sewing a 3.5 inch by 1.5 inch light blue rectangle, and remember my blue is this neutral shades here. We're going to sew that on the bottom side, and we're going to sew a 1.5 by 3.5 inch light pink on the top of this triangle. So I'm going to take these two pieces, of these two strips, if you will, and I am going to subcut 3.5 inch lengths from these two. All right, and what I'm going to do is sew this one to the bottom and press it to the darker side, and sew this one to the top and press it to the darker side. So I'm going to go ahead and get those sewn. I'll bring it back to the tabletop. As you follow down the directions for cutting and so forth, we've already applied the 3.5 inch light rectangles, the pink and the blue, on the top and the bottom of this 3.5 inch square. Now we're going to attach the 1.5 by 5.5 inch blue and pink rectangles to the opposite sides. So both of these remnants now have to be subcut to be 5.5 inches. And you'll notice that I'm using a piece here in my beige that has a seam in it. So I'm just taking advantage of sewing two of those together. You don't have to do that if you don't want. If you want to have all of yours to be without seams in the middle, that's fine. But I am just taking advantage of what I have here. And so I need to subcut both of these pieces to 5.5 inches, as it tells us here in the directions. So 3, 4, 5.5. There we go. All right, now you're going to put the pink on one side, and this would be considered the blue on the other side, and you're going to sew these along here and open them up. I am pressing mine out, and it will eventually be completely toward the dark because all of your darker pieces are being added on. But I'm pressing it all away from the center square. That's what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these two pieces on, and I'll bring this back to the tabletop. I've added my pink on this side and my what would be considered blue in the pattern on this side. I'm using neutrals, as I mentioned, for my blues, and I am using pinks for my pinks. So now this much of it should be squared up to 5.5 inches. 5.5 inches is the longest piece that we've added. And as you'll see here, I went ahead and used a piece that had been sewn together. So, and I don't mind that. I don't mind using pieces like that. But if that bothers you, then just don't use pieces that have seams in them. Just go ahead and use plain strips. I have everything pressed towards the outside. I did press that open so that it lays nice and flat. And you can barely notice that there's a seam there. So I'm going to go ahead now, once I'm finger pressing everything. It would probably be best for you to take it to your iron and just press everything and then square it up, 5.5 inches. The next thing we're going to do is add 2 more strips. Whenever we add strips on a log cabin, you're always going to add the strips to the side that have these sewn seam allowances. So here's 2 seam allowances, and there's 2 seam allowances. So the next 2 strips have to be added to that section. So I'll be adding a pink section here, and I'll be adding a blue, or in my case, neutral section down there. So always look for those seam allowances. That's what you want to add your next log to. And keep your pinks on this side and your blues, or in my case, neutrals, on that side of the block. And then you'll just continue working this log cabin. All right, so this one is ready for the next round. So now I'm on the mediums, and this is my medium pink and my medium neutral, or in your case, blue if you're using blue. And these are my 2 seam allowances here and here, so that's where I need to add my next 2 logs. The logs are always opposite one another as you're adding them. They should never go adjacent in this case with this type of log cabin. They'll have to go on the opposite sides. And because this is 5.5 inches in width, these need to have some subcuts that are 5.5 inches long, and they are 1.5 inches wide. So I'm going to put these 2 together, and I'm just going to use my mat here and count out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. All right, so the pink is going to go here. The medium neutral, I want to make sure he's in the screen for you, is going to go there. So I'm going to sew this on here, 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it like that. I'm going to sew this one right there, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and press it like that. All right, so I have my medium pink up here. I have my medium neutral down there. And now you'll notice that my seams that touch the outside edges are on the longer sides here. So there's where my seam is. Here's where that seam is. So I need to sew logs on each side here where those 2 seams are. So what I will be doing is sewing a medium pink over here, and I'll be sewing a medium neutral over there. And because this length is 7.5 inches, I'm going to subcut 7.5 inch rectangles from these 2, and that's what I will sew on here. And again, I'm just going to use my mat. I could also use, I do have a longer ruler sitting over here now that I could use. So here, so that is 7.5 inches right there by 1.5. I have them stacked. All right. So this medium pink will get sewn there. The medium neutral, or in your case blue, will go there. So they are going to be sewn, and always be looking for those seam allowances. You're going to cover those seam allowances as you're sewing with another log. So I'm going to sew this 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it open. So here, 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it open. You'll notice as we have been sewing these, there's always two of one color forming like an L on each side. So there's two of these light neutrals, two of the medium neutral, two of the light pink, two of the medium pink, and then now next we're going to be sewing two of the dark pink and two of the dark neutral, if you will. And again, here's my seam allowances right here. So that means the next logs have to be added where these two seam allowances are on that open end of the block. So I'm going to subcut these, and the length here is 7.5 inches. So I'm going to subcut a length from this dark and this dark at 7.5 inches. This square, when you pressed it, it should be squared up to 7.5 inches exactly. So that whole thing should be 7.5 inches lengthwise and widthwise. And so now let's take these two here. I'm going to place them on top of one another. And I'm going to get my long ruler here. It's hiding under here. Here we go. And I'm going to cut this at 7.5 inches. So here we are at the 7.5 inch mark. And let's subcut these. So this one will be sewn here. This one will be sewn here. And let me give you a hint on how to ensure these strips go on here well. I would recommend, as you're sewing them on, to pin on the outer edges here, match up those outer edges perfectly. And then the center, match that. And then make sure as you're sewing it that they match up beautifully all the way around. You don't want to be cutting yourself short or stretching out the bottom or the block itself, and then things become cattywampus. You want to make sure that these two are matched up perfectly there on each end. Do the same here. Sew at 1/4 inch seam allowance, then press it open. I'm going to go ahead and take this to the sewing machine and do that, and I'll be right back. We're going to stitch the last two pieces on, and you'll see that my seam allowances on the raw edge are here on this side, so those logs have to be added to these two sides of the block, which makes sense because we need to finish off this color here, and we need to finish off this color there. And that will make our perfect 9.5 inch blocks when it's pressed and squared up. So what I need to do at this point is subcut 9.5 inch strips from these two. So let me grab my ruler. All right, there is 9.5. So I'm saving all of my little scraps because I might be able to use them in future blocks, so just keep that all in a basket with your beginning quilting class supplies. All right, so now this is going to go on the outer sides where these seam allowances are, and we're going to be able to finish this block. Again, pin on both ends, pin in the center, and then stitch 1/4 inch, pin on both ends, pin in the center, stitch 1/4 inch, press them open. I am pressing everything out away from the center block is what I have done. And once that's done, then square this up to 9.5 inches. Let me get these sewn on. I'll be right back. Mine has been sewn on, and I have pressed it. Let me put it in the right direction for you, and squared it up to 9.5 inches. You can certainly use a 9.5 inch OmniGrid ruler. I do have one of those, but you don't need to. If you don't have one of those, you can certainly use any ruler and just use your mat and square it up to 9.5 inches once it's pressed. And I have pressed everything toward the outside, toward the dark. And here it is. It is finished. And so now we have quite a few blocks. We have 5 different blocks that are ready to be put into our sampler quilt. I can't wait to make some more of these. If you are new to quilting, this log cabin block is a wonderful, wonderful block to make an entire quilt. It's a great one to use to make scrappy quilts with. You can just use a uniform color for the center, whether that's yellow or red, whatever you'd like to use in the center, and then use one. Maybe you could use all darks on this side and all lights on this side, or use colors that go from light, medium to dark, whatever you choose to do. There's so many different things you can do with a log cabin block, and you can make some beautiful, beautiful quilts. And then not only does it make a beautiful block, but when you're actually putting this together, there's so many different layouts to create so many different designs. I do have some wonderful videos out there. I'll link some of those in the description box below where you can see what you can do with a log cabin block. Don't forget to post pictures of the blocks that you are creating out on my Facebook group page. It's Quilting with Lori. Scrap Up Your Stash. It's in Facebook. I'll have a link below. Make sure you go down there, grab that, join it, and post some pictures. We would all love to see what you're working on. Next time, we will be making this wonderful kaleidoscope block right there. So you're going to be learning how to use a template, and we're going to be sewing some triangles, and these actually kind of look like little kites there. So that will be a fun block. We'll be working on that next time. So I look forward to seeing you in just a couple weeks. If you like the content that I provide here on my channel, I hope that you'll go ahead and like and subscribe. Please share this video with friends of yours, with people that you know are looking to learn to quilt, or maybe they just want to tone up on their skills for some of the quilting techniques that I'll be teaching. We'd sure love to have you all join. But thank you so much for hitting the like and the subscription button. And don't forget to hit the notifications bell. That way you'll know, you'll be notified each and every time that I do load a video. And please don't forget to comment. Commenting really helps my channel to get out to other quilters just like yourself, so that they have an opportunity to watch the videos as well. So thank you so much. Until next time, happy quilting.